to have an alternate, go ahead and recommend somebody, and we'll make those changes for you too. Buddy Sebastian.
Duck Lake, Albion, Michigan.
Jason Walther.
Yep, Jason's here from sunny Three Rivers, Michigan.
Kyle Aurora, or anybody from Ducks Unlimited. And how about Tom Frazier?
Here, Sheboygan, Michigan.
Perfect, thank you. All right, and now let me start by going around the room for those here in Constitution Hall. Starting on my left.
Christine Spitzley, OHM Advisors.
Megan Tinsley, Michigan Environmental Council.
Dave Hamilton, the Nature Conservancy.
Doug Needham with the Aggregate Association.
Christopher Gothberg, Eagle. Jim Milne, Eagle Water Use.
Teresa Snyder, Water Resources Division.
Ben Carroll, Michigan Farm Bureau. Okay. I see Hannah Arnett online. Would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Water Use Assessment Unit, Eagle.
Aaron or Jeremiah Asher? Not sure which one you prefer.
Jeremiah, and I'm present here in Bath.
Simon Belisle.
I am present in Meriden Township, Michigan.
Clyde Dugan.
I'm here, Meridian Township, Michigan.
And is it Dugan or Duggan?
Dugan.
All right, come on. Dave Lush.
Present in Lansing, Michigan.
John Ash.
Present in Lynchburg, Michigan.
Grant Poole.
Grant Poole, Dowagiac, Michigan. Puggy and Bay on DNR.
Ralph Hefner.
Hi there, Ralph Hefner, Lansing, Michigan.
Ross Helmer.
Eagle Water Use Assessment Unit.
Joel Henry.
Present for Golder and present in Hazlet, Michigan.
Clay Jupery.
Here with Eagle, I'm in East Lansing, Michigan.
Kelly Turner.
I'm participating from Heartland, Michigan.
Andy LeBaron.
Hello, Water Use Eagle, coming at you from Olive Township, Clinton County.
Thank you. Logan McMillan.
Hi, I'm Logan McMillan, OHM Advisors, here on behalf of Christine Spitzley.
Mike Frederick.
Here, I'm calling from Holland, Michigan.
Lena Pappas. We know you're there. We didn't quite catch everything here, but we know you're there. Nathaniel Schaff.
Present, Eaton County, Eagle, Water Use.
Todd Feenstra.
I'm here from Elkhart, Indiana.
Adam Zwickel.
Tuned in from East Lansing.
We have have two telephone numbers. The first one, if it's you, please identify yourself. It's 248-343-0916.
That's me. I'm calling it on my cell phone too, so that I don't lose you.
Perfect. And how about the telephone number 517 area code ends in 5584?
Yeah, Brian, that's me, Tom Freezer.
Perfect, thank you. All right, I'm going to take a second here to see the chat session, see if I missed something.
Hey, can we, real quick, can we get everybody to mute their mics? Apparently everyone else is hearing a lot of background noise.
Okay. So in response to some of that background noise that some of you have indicated, if everybody could just take a second and put yourself on mute and really only come off of that if you have a question, comments, or you have to speak. Maybe we'll see if that helps address it.
I think it's the data projector fan is what they're picking up. So can we move?
Yeah, 2 mobile phones on.
Give us a second. There's a possibility that it is the cooling fan for the projector that's on the same table. While Jim tries to fix that, we'll see if it works, see if it's possible. We're going to move on in the agenda just slightly. And I will mention here that we have approval of the agenda. We do not have a quorum today present in person. So votes that we would take are not official. So I'm not going to necessarily bother to do that, but I would like to take this opportunity to ask if any participants have any questions, comments, additions, concerns with the agenda as it was sent to you. If you do, speak up. We'll take that on.
Okay, I moved the L to a side table further away from the fan from the data projector. If somebody could give us some feedback on how that is, whether that's helping the noise.
It's a little better. We can still hear it. We can still hear it. It only really goes quiet when you're talking.
Okay. We may continue to fool around with that as much as we can here to try to minimize it for you. We apologize. It's interesting, electronics, we can't really hear that, but we'll keep trying to see what we can do.
I muted the mobile phone numbers, so if that helps, let me know.
This is Frank Edowagishik, and I noticed, like, for instance, Brian Eggers, when you spoke, when your mic was active, we stopped hearing that background noise. And so when other people are speaking, the background noise goes away. As soon as you stop, it comes back on.
Okay.
So we need to have more conversations.
Keep talking. Let's get to talking. Yeah, that's fine. Does anybody have any additions or concerns with the agenda as it's been sent out? Last note, I'm not seeing any. So we'll consider the agenda sufficient for our purposes of meeting today. Moving on to the
We just lost the mic. We just lost the mic. All right, now it's not touching.
You got a mic.
Can you guys hear me at least?
Perfectly now, yes. The background noise is gone as well. I spoke too soon.
Yeah.
Okay, so we accidentally unplugged the microphone and are fiddling around trying to improve the situation, lost our audio, and for a second you weren't hearing the fan because that wasn't plugged in, and I switched to my laptop computer. Apologize, we're going to keep trying to persevere through here for a couple of minutes. Approval of minutes. Again, we don't really have the ability in person with a quorum to vote on that, but I would like to see if anybody identified any concerns or edits that they desired out of the last meeting minutes? If you do, please either speak up, raise a hand electronically, chat. I'm doing my best.
This is Frank Getowagishik. I had no changes.
Thanks, Frank. All right. Oh. All right. I'm not seeing anything on the minutes, so for now, we're going to go ahead and say that the minutes are in good order. Again, at some later meeting, when we really push to have everybody here in person, we will have a backlog of meeting minutes to officially approve. So you have a little time. If you do sit down with it and find some edits, you can send those in. Okay, so we'll move on now to agenda item number 5, which would be the public comment, the first public comment opportunity of the meeting. We usually restrict these to about 3 minutes. Does anybody present in the room first wish to make any public comment? And I'm not seeing any. How about online? Do we have anybody joining us virtually who would like to take this opportunity to provide some comment? Okay. I don't want to be too quick, but I'm not seeing anything, so I think we're safe to continue. If anybody did and you just couldn't get your virtual controls off in time, there's another opportunity at the end of the meeting. Okay, moving on. Agenda item number 6 is the legislative update. I'm going to start that and do my attempt to share the information that I have with all of you. And I'd like this agenda item to sort of be a sharing of information. I found that when you are trying to figure out what the legislative direction is, it takes a lot of people sharing information and then trying to make the most sense out of it. So I will start, and then I invite any of you who have been having conversations to chip in at the end. The first thing I'd like to share is that I don't quite remember how long ago it was, perhaps about a month now. The co-chairs of the Water Use Advisory Council were invited to sit down at a meeting with some legislative staff in the Senate to discuss the Water Use Advisory Council's recommendations and the funding recommendations that we put in the report, and to also discuss that in the context of federal COVID relief dollars that the state is in the process of making decisions of how to spend. I think we had a good meeting. We were able to ask a lot of questions and kind of understand what they're grappling with and what they're up against with the nature of those funds and the rule sets for using them. We definitely relayed that we wrote this report at a time when we were predicting, or they were predicting, a $3 billion a year budget shortfall. And we tried to be quite frugal and cost efficient with what we chose to ask for and prioritize. They are now in a very different position than what they thought they were in when we wrote it, and they appreciate that. So there was discussions about various, how much money might be possible, what it would be going for, what some of their constraints were. They definitely had in their mind the Water Council report recommendations, the geologic mapping, and some groundwater monitoring well development ideas were on their mind. We also talked a little bit about stream gauge systems needs. More or less talked a little bit about possibilities for how we could expand what we asked for. And I would say one of the concepts that we did have a discussion with them about was also just the flexibility. Do they need to put money into very specific immediate projects, or was there a little bit of time flexibility to apportion the amount of money that they that they desire to put into this program as an investment, and then give us time to develop, as robust plans and cost-effective and efficient plans as possible. We didn't leave with any clear direction or notion. It was just a good exchange of information and ideas. And ultimately, the clearest message I think that we sent was, the program's been underinvested in for a really long time, and no matter what you need or style of making the investments, we would rise to the challenge and put it to good work, period. With that said, I have just very, very recently taken a look at the Senate Appropriations bill for this 565 as it passed this, as it's labeled as passing the Senate. And my review of that is that the way that the appropriation shaped up was that they specifically spelled out the geologic mapping and portioned that, I believe, $15 million is the proposal, and then had all other things grouped under the Water Use Advisory Council recommendations, and that actually is right now being proposed at a $20 million investment. So that is good news, I think. Maybe some aren't as happy with that, but it is, both of those buckets are in excess of what we had originally recommended a couple years ago. So I think that's positive. It still has quite a bit of time to get through all of the legislature. So it's far from over. That's basically what I have available to me for information to share with you. How about the rest of you? What conversations have you had that you're willing to share to let us know about the direction of things? Don't be too bashful. It's a large group of people here. I know somebody's talked with somebody in the legislature.
Hey, Brian, this is Kelly Turner. Can you hear me?
Yeah, quite well.
Oh, good. So, talking with some representatives this week, they were concerned, I guess, about some of the language in the Senate Bill 565 that you referenced. Given that this body only has authority to make recommendations, there was worry that those funds weren't very well spelled out for how they should be used. And I had gotten some questions as to whether or not we think that needs to be kind of delineated more, have more specifics added to the language. And that I don't have the answer for, but I think that would be for this group to talk through.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I understand maybe a little bit of the nature of that. I haven't just read it. I think they did use a word that the Water Council would appropriate those funds towards the recommendations in its report. And of course, we can't appropriate things. But so I hope the intent would be that we would make recommendations as we do to the legislature, and of course they're the ones that appropriate expenditure. So hopefully that gets cleared up.
Dave Walsh has his.
With that being said, is there a meeting or a way that we need to communicate those specifics to the legislators in the House if they're going to take a look at this bill and propose changes to it? I think they're working on that over the holiday. Is this something that information we're going to want to get to them so that they can consider it?
Kelly, I'm not sure I completely followed your question. Are you mentioning follow-up on just making sure that the language is in the bill, the Senate bill, is a little more defined, or are you speaking to the process that we might undertake to reach recommendations on the expense? What priorities there should be?
No, I'm just, so the language that's in there right now that focuses on our recommendations from 2020, what information do we need to get to them so that they can have the language in there to make sure that those funds are appropriated the way that this council would like to see them appropriated.
Shouldn't those funds be appropriated to Eagle and then they be spent based on the recommendations of the council? Or, I mean, yeah, I don't, somehow they would have to float to some government entity.
It's a good discussion. I believe that that's normally how it is. I believe we are nested under the Eagle appropriation section. The way I would envision it or anticipate, frankly, is we have the standing report that we all reach consensus on and produce. So those items and those expenditures are, sort of immediately able to begin working on them. Now, if they end up appropriating excess funds beyond what we need to accomplish those, then we need to be responsive inside of this committee process to reach consensus on how to increase the amounts or add different projects to accelerate past what we had reached consensus on in the first report. And, we may indeed, we're already, we're entering 1 year left before a report, so maybe we don't need to speed that up, but I think in the long term, say we spend, $5 million next year, that's all already been agreed upon. We reach consensus in the next report of how to spend, and there was some left over still. I think that we would all want to discuss, hey, we're not going to wait another 2-year cycle for the next report. We now have money. People are expecting us to make recommendations on the appropriation of those. We're going to do a 1-year report, and we may need to all be sensitive to the timing within the calendar year as well, that they need that and their budget process, not just our ideals of, turning out a report in December. So that's how I think I would envision it, is, doing the work that we typically do and just trying to reach consensus on how to reach consensus on in our last report. But that's my take. Any others? I see chat and maybe a hand up. So
I've got one thought, Brian, that I think our report was very specific about the recommendations. Obviously, the legislation is not as specific as that, but it's referring back to it. So I think if some legislators are raising questions, I think we should point them to the report. If they want to pull language out of that, make it more specific, they certainly can, or they can just say that, okay, there is more specific direction there, and we're referring back to this. So that may take care of the issue.
I would infer that the previous version spoke to a couple of, they were still very brief, but they spoke to a couple of the main topic ideas in our report. And seeing them go to sort of more parsimonious and high-level language, I would assume that that was a purposeful decision, that they trust that we are, accountable to them. Do that frequently, and I don't think I read in that they weren't wanting to sort of line item by line, but I'm not sure. That's my.
Well, Kelly had raised the question had come up, and I think we need to be responsive to questions, but I think we need to be careful too about trying to craft legislation. I don't think we want to do that.
No, we can't.
Brian, there is a question from Todd Feenstra in the chat.
Yes.
Todd's asking, is there a timeline to expend the federal funds? 3 years, question mark, from when?
Yeah, so I will do my best shot. I will start by saying I am not the best person to ask. I'm not completely sure. What we heard, or what I gathered in our meeting, Ben, you help me if I get it wrong, was that the legislature has its attorneys reading through all the rule sets and interpreting things. The executive branch has its attorneys reading through everything. Everybody's trying to make sure they completely understand the rule sets to follow and the flexibility that's there. But we did specifically ask what kind of time horizon to expend might we have. And at our meeting, again, with all caveats that they're not certain determinations, that, yeah, there's most likely several years. Anything more honed in than that. I am not up to speed on how all the interpretations have progressed, but they give some examples of some programs that may receive these type of funds that may take quite a few years to actually expend it. They'll be allocated immediately, but it may take a while to expend. Teresa, is that still sort of lightly consistent with what you're hearing?
That's quite consistent with what we're hearing.
Okay.
And typically, once it's appropriated and then we encumber it into, comes to Eagle, we'll encumber it into Water Use Advisory Council and then work through recommendations from there. That gives us the ability to roll cash forward and have it. And if we don't encumber it, then that's when it gets lost. So I'm not super worried about encumbering the dollars.
Looks like there's also a question from Dave Lush. He's got his hand raised.
Yep, thank you. Dave Lush, you with your hand raised and being patient, go ahead.
Yeah, in the reading of 565 that passed the Senate, there's an appropriation, as you mentioned, for the Michigan Geological Survey to do geologic mapping. And we also had a recommendation from the council for the same work. And that got in, all of our recommendations are in one line item stating fund the council for 20 million bucks. So my question is whether anybody, John Yelich or anybody else, knows whether Michigan Geological Survey would receive both the funds that were in our recommendation as well as the additional line item that was spoken about in 565.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I see John has his hand up. I'll go to John first, but I think I may have a little inference into that, and of course, maybe just need to follow, but I'll wait. John, you go ahead.
Dave, good question. I do not know. What I do know is that, and I was waiting to hear other comments, that we have met with one House representative to talk about the funding for the survey, and we prepared an outline, shared that with Teresa Seidel and her group about water use areas, and we had 10 counties that needed to be mapped, and that's part of the priority. A secondary one was part of MPART, and the fact that they needed to have counties where we needed geologic data. And then the last thing that was coupled together is that when we map these two areas, the third benefit that comes out of it is we find out potentially where we have near surface aggregates. And so that's been the discussion that we've had with a representative. As far as I know right now, I don't think that there's a House bill that is looking at funding this in parallel with the 15M. But right now, as far as I know, Dave and everybody else, the only thing I know about is it's identified 15 million for the survey to conduct the mapping in priority areas.
Yeah, so the way I would infer, and I think it can be just a future discussion that we talked about, right? If this goes through in a similar fashion to how it's worded, those are choices and discussions we'll have to have. The way I infer it, and it's probably also pretty easy just to get back with some of the senators who wrote this and ask them what their intent was. That's not that difficult to do, and that's probably right. But when I looked at the previous version of this Senate appropriation bill, it had 15 million for the geologic data collection, and it had a total of 5 million for the Water Use Advisory Council recommendations. And so I think what you should infer there is at that point they were trying to fully fund all of the Water Council recommendations minus the geologic data. 5 million was roughly what the 2-year recommendations minus the geologic was. So I think what you would want to infer is that they were purposely trying to separate the geologic data collection needs from the remainder of the Water Council report. So if that is, you know, kind of a clear intent on the first bill, I would say that probably that motion carried forward into this. But it's easy enough to clarify. Hopefully that's helpful. And I had time quick enough to Google that before. So Any other questions or information sharing to be had on the legislative updates? If not, I would just encourage everybody to, oh, I see Dave blush again. I just will finish by, and then go to Dave by just saying, as we enter into the House process, you know, if you are acting in there and communicating, you can get some information, please share. I think the goal here is obviously to get investment in this program that we haven't gotten for a very long time now. So that's what success looks like. And it looks like we're on a good track, but you never know. Dave.
So Brian, is it your recommendation or hope or aspiration that if the House goes along with the $20 million line item for the council recommendations, that we will have an opportunity then to add new recommendations? We're not just fixed to the ones that we submitted, so that we can utilize those unencumbered funds?
That is my understanding. Absolutely. Yep. You know, to be very casual about it and to, you know, summarize things in conversations that I've had, you know, it's not lost on anybody that this program has not really received significant investment in, I think it's been 12, 13 years now. So we're way behind, right? And general fund comes hard. And they have some one-time funding here. And the question is, you know, how do you make it go the distance? How do you make it have the greatest utility? It's one time. You know, you can get $20 million and you then can go back the next year and struggle to get $200,000 in general fund. There's some time flexibility here, and I think they're trying to set us up. Again, if I read too much into it, I apologize, but I think they're trying to set us up with a couple years worth of investment. And our job will be to respond as we do, right? To talk about priorities, greatest utility of data, the most cost-efficient approaches, come up with consensus recommendations on how to spend that and come back to them and then seek their approval. That's our job, is to make those recommendations. So that's how I see it, Dave. But yes.
And going along with that, does that mean, since it's December now, so we've missed this deadline, so to speak, that we would not have to wait till December of next year to file our regularly scheduled report, that we could do an update to our recommendation document, so that we could encumber the funds that whatever does get allocated?
Yeah, I think all of us will have to sit down and look at timing and rethink when we do reports. Now, at a minimum, we have to give a report every 2 years, and we started that on the date that the statute went into place and, you know, made us exist, and that happened to push us to December for our first report deadline. We now have 12 months until the second one's due. At any point in time, we can decide, if we have it within us, to meet quicker, meet faster, and do a report quicker at any point in time. And yeah, I think that we will have to take a hard look. I suspect, honestly, that if this type of structure goes through, we need to plan on some level of a report annually, and that deadline needs to be in time prior to when they need it for their budget discussions.
Provided that you have an in-person quorum that can make decisions.
We'll get it done. We'll get it done. All right, Kelly Turner has her hand raised.
Is there like a body or someone that we can get some direction from to make sure that what your understanding is actually the way that it'll work? Because that is not the same understanding that I had for this process. So I think we all need to be very clear and understand exactly what the process is, because in statute, we can only make recommendations. So we can recommend to Eagle where we would like this money spent, but really we have no control over where it's being spent. So we can recommend all day long what we want done, but in the end, we don't actually get to decide, I don't believe, unless it's spelled out how the funds will be used.
And I would say, while that's true, that the Water Use Advisory Council is an advisory council to Eagle. If you all came in and had consensus on recommendations and are going to advance the program and to give us sound data to make good decisions, there would be no reason we would not support them.
Yeah, and if the legislature, uses terms as though that appropriation is for the Water Council report recommendations, if Eagle receives that money and they do not use it for that purpose, then that's, that's bad.
Well, we'd be sitting in front of the legislature answering questions.
And we will, I think it's safe to say, Teresa, that we will work with the appropriate committees and the full council to keep you updated on our implementation plans once they're developed.
100%. I think our biggest concern is making sure we are collaborating as a group, that we're not all off trying to get our own pots of cash, that we're here at the table working together to advance the groundwater and water use program in the state of Michigan by making the improvements that the council recommends, but making sure there's a strong technical component to what we're asking for, so that the data comes back and it's useful for us to make the best decisions possible for the state.
Thank you. All right, I'm not seeing any other hands raised. I'm going to go ahead and lurch us forward onto agenda item number 7, which is an informational update on the groundwater monitoring well network. And I believe that Kelly, you were going to lead that, is that correct?
Yeah. I think that there could be some slides included in there too. I'm a visual, so I like to make sure people have something to look at other than my mug. So, taking a look at the recommendations that we sent to the legislators in 2020, there's a little tiny line, it's only like 6 or 7 words, but it talks about a groundwater monitoring well system or network. So taking this idea, of course, when we put those recommendations in, as Brian said, we were looking at a huge budget deficit and really worked as a council to try to fit in as much as possible, but knowing that there was really just this very small possible pocket of money. But now that we've got some federal dollars available through the ARPA funds and possibly the infrastructure bill, we kind of took a look at what would this program look like if we kind of made it more robust versus just 7 lines, right? And maybe put some parameters and some thought around it. So it was the end of September when we actually put something on paper to look at. The beginning of October, we shared kind of a proposal or an idea that we had with the chairs of the Water Use Advisory Council, a few select legislators who have kind of backgrounds, not really backgrounds, I guess that's not a good word to use, but really interest in this area, and kind of put together kind of a little proposal for them. So if you want to go to the next slide. Taking a look at the MyWatt tool, I've been very, very adamant that the tool does exactly what it's supposed to do, right? So it's an early warning system that really helps us hone in on where we might have some critical areas in the state where water resources are fewer than what the withdrawals would like to be. So the part of the problem comes in when we get to the site-specific review process. So we really need to take a more in-depth look at the real impact in that geographic area. So if you will move to the next slide. So part of the issue with the site-specific review process is that there's currently no written standards for or procedures for that data collection, right? And so working through Eagle and trying to find some sort of standardization for this, I think is difficult, probably because the lithology across the state is different. Each area of the state poses a different problem when we're trying to figure out what information needs to be gathered to look at this specific area of the state. Costs for these are, well, I have on here $60,000. That's probably really on the lower end. I've heard some of them up over $100,000. And those costs, of course, are borne solely by the landowner or the applicant. You'll move to the next slide. So in Michigan, we have this conundrum, right? And we have to work with understanding, we need to understand what our water resources are so that we can make sound regulatory decisions. Right now, there's this huge tension that's continuing to kind of come together when it comes to the regulators and the people being regulated. And quite honestly, I'm glad I'm not either one of those because they both have a really tough job when it comes to making sure that we're using water resources in a sustainable way, because the first objective is, of course, to protect the resource. But second of all is to understand what we have so that we can use it in a way that provides economic development, yet isn't impacting the system. I don't know what happened to my slides, but we'll keep moving here. So a group of people that kind of helped us gather some information and some input, a coalition, not just farm groups, but also the Groundwater Association, the Aggregate Association, some irrigation companies to really help us understand this issue. So if you'll move to the next slide, everybody can see the logos that are there. All right, and then go ahead and move to the next slide because I kind of moved past this. So our proposal is to take that 7 words that are in our current recommendations and really blow that project up a little bit. So what we'd be asking for is a one-time funding of $25 million for the installation of up to 500 monitoring wells, along with 3 years of data collection. So what this program is I think everyone here is familiar with the Cass County model. And so really taking that model and looking at how do we extend that across the state. To the next slide. So we did a 500 well system in the state, and in the language that we have proposed, it's over 450 sites, just because some of those sites would require nested wells to get an accurate picture of the data. What this program does is, number one, there's no legacy cost to taxpayers, right? Because we're not asking to add employees over a long haul. We're not asking to add infrastructure for the Department of Eagle. Really, this would be working with a third party or third parties to use systems and standards that are in place for collecting this type of information to really create this network so that we can use it to verify the local geology. Is very compatible with the work that John would be doing with mapping. It really gives us a great understanding of those seasonal trends, right? I was in a couple meetings just this month, and there's debate over what the seasonal trends look like for how water moves through the system and what those storage values are. One thing we really like about this as well is it still serves as that early warning system for depletion. And so to us, that's really important because once you start to see depletion, it's really tough to backpedal on that. To us, it's really important that we have a really good handle and understanding with data that's been collected to understand what water resources we have, so we know how many checks we can write in the checkbook, right? And we're not holding up businesses that could possibly be creating some more economic development just because we don't know, right? Or we're looking at models based off of other models and not actual data. It was surprising to me that on USGS's website, where you can see the other monitoring wells in each state, that the state of Nebraska has more monitoring wells per county than we have here in the whole state of Michigan. So as a refresher, I think currently there's 26, and most of them are either in Lansing or the Kalamazoo area. Stop there because I see there are hands up already, and I can't see everyone, Brian, so I guess I'm gonna rely on you to field who gets to ask questions.
Sure. I don't see that many hands. I see Jim Milne has his hand raised electronically.
Yeah, Christopher, will you back up to that site-specific review slide? Yep, that's the one. Thank you. I do want to note for the record a couple of comments on the first two bullet points on this slide. The first bullet point is I consider misleading. The statement that no written standards or procedures for data collection, aquifer testing, or modeling exist. Water use staff did draft guidance documents for aquifer pumping test, and also for modeling reports. Those drafts were shared with the models committee and the council. We got comments back. We made edits based on some of those comments. There are still outstanding issues that need to be discussed between water use staff and the co-chairs of the models committee, and then take it back to the full committee and then eventually back to the council. But it is misleading to say that no written standards exist. They're in development. The second bullet point, this is the first time I'm hearing about allegations that we're inconsistent in our site-specific reviews. No specifics have been provided. If there are specific site-specific reviews that you want to discuss, I'd be happy to discuss those with you, but get those comments to us in writing and we'd be happy to set up a meeting to discuss it further and or take it up in the appropriate council committee. But without any specifics, I have no basis for responding to that.
Thank you, Jim. Kelly, do you have anything that you feel like you want to respond with, or?
I want to make sure people understand this is not an attack on Eagle, right? So Eagle has, in my opinion, one of the worst and hardest jobs in the state. I'm surprised people stay there so long sometimes, just because the tools that they have really need to be updated, right? Like we've all sat around this table and heard how there's more information, more data that's needed to make sound decisions. And Eagle, they put their names on the line every day, right? Because their job, number one, is to protect the resource. And number two, they have to do it given the tools they're given, which haven't been updated in forever, right? So I hope you didn't take it personally, Jim. This definitely wasn't a personal attack. But some folks that I visited with just say that one site-specific review requirement is different than others, and that's happening more and more. I definitely can see how that can be the case, especially with the geology across the state, right?
By nature, there's going to be some differences because of different sites, but if you've got specific examples, then by all means, get us something in writing that we can look at and respond to either individually in a meeting or take it back to one of the council committees, and we'd be happy to discuss it further.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's actually really healthy and productive. I mean, I see them using that as a justification for the proposal, and what I'm hearing is that you as a professional, you know, really take it very serious, being inconsistent, you know, having some of those things. You work hard and you're reaching out and saying, you know, you'll work harder there and dig in on it if needed. So I think that's good. Let's switch over. Pat, you have your hand raised first, and then Andy LeBaron after you. Go ahead, Pat.
Thanks. I guess I got a process question or comment, and then another comment. First, from a process standpoint, I guess anybody can present to the council, but I guess we've got committees set up to do some of this review, and it seems like this deals with data collection, deals a little bit with modeling, and so I guess it seems like we need to have this topic at a committee level before we present it before the council. Because anyway, that's my thoughts. And then Ottawa County received about a little over $1 million in grant money to do groundwater monitoring. So we're in the process of developing that work plan, and so we have an opportunity to pilot or somehow gain some information from that process. So I think the idea itself isn't a bad idea, but I guess I'd like to see a little bit more work on the committee level before it gets presented to council. Thanks.
Yeah, and knowing that there's a possibility of this process for continuing to modify or add to the Water Use Advisory Council's recommendations is positive, but also knowing that there's a very short window of time for these funds to be available. I think possibly looking at having more meetings in the next few months of the Water Use Advisory Council to make sure we're addressing these might be something that we'd want to consider as well.
In response to that, I have a question in the room. Go ahead, Dave Hamilton.
Well, I guess one thing I want to make sure that we do is that this is coordinated. It didn't come through our committee structure, which is what we tried to set up, so that if there's just coming out of this group for data collection, groundwater monitoring and modeling, we've got committees set up to try to work on that. I am all for more data collection, and I'm glad that you've got a group that's willing to support that. But I just want to make sure that we coordinate, and this kind of work especially needs to be coordinated with EGLE, with U.S. Geological Survey, and probably the Michigan Geological Survey, and not just an independent effort. It's going to be critical this is coordinated. And for it to be of use long term, I think we need to look at holistically through this council.
Andy LeBaron, your hand is up.
So I guess in response to that, I have several questions because I have seen some information from other groups as well and some members of this council. So if that's going to apply, I think it needs to apply to everybody, right? And not just one group.
You could go ahead and see if can you explain that in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, so I saw a letter of recommendations from Flo and some others, and that had some folks from this council listed on it with the Water Use Advisory Council listed as their credentials, which to me goes well beyond us trying to get some ideas and put this program together and put it out as a proposal. So I think if we're going to say that this has to follow a certain set of rules, then I think everyone should be held to those same standards.
And that letter was supporting the council recommendations. It was nothing beyond council recommendations. It was supporting them. So these people coming together to support the council recommendations.
This is supporting one piece of the council recommendations. We're just putting out a proposal for how do we build that out and how do you make that stronger, right? And so, like I said, this is kind of took shape the middle of October, and we've gotten a lot of feedback from it. So we've met with EGLE and a lot of other groups. And so we've taken all of their feedback and their thoughts so that now we can come and bring this to you as hopefully a well thought out proposal, right, that you guys would consider. But also I want you to consider that there's a really short time frame for this as well.
I don't want to be unfair to the hands that are up, so let me move it. We can keep coming back around. Andy LeBaron, you've had yours up for a minute.
Yes, just one more real quick point of clarification on that slide that's up right there. I think probably most everyone in the room and on the meeting here is aware, but just if this slide were to be shared outside, that third bullet point that talks about the cost typically typically exceeded, $60,000 per registration. Just obviously, so everyone realizes that is only in the cases where a site-specific review otherwise couldn't be authorized or passed, and new data collection, new hydrogeologic data collection is necessary. And of course, that would only be in the cases where we thought that it would improve the determination that we made there. So that would be the recommendation from Eagle, assuming that those folks, the property owners pursuing that, had confirmed with Eagle that it looks like it would be useful for them in that case. And so these costs, or this new data collection costs, are kind of exceedingly rare that we get too many of those in. So it's not a common occurrence that folks, property owners, are out there spending this kind of money. Obviously, in full support of the opportunity to have that funded through other means besides just out of their pocket like this. But just wanted to make sure everyone is clear on that cost and how often that money.
Thank you. Thank you. Todd Feenstra.
I think I may bring a little bit different perspective just because of the job that we do in working with Midwest water stewards. We've been collecting this data for a long time, and it's had a big impact in the ag community. About 85% of the large quantity withdrawals registered in the tool are agricultural use. And there's definitely some bridges that need to be rebuilt as far as trust, communication, kind of some openness, some transparency. The things that I really like about the water well data, the groundwater data that we've been collecting, and that this would definitely expand in that same direction, is you're getting on properties that normally wouldn't have access to. And so you're working directly with the ag and the state conjunctively, cooperatively. And it's not a model, it's not a theory, it's not this subjective thing. At some point, it's pretty objective. It's data. The measurements are what they are. One of the big advantages about getting out into fields near irrigation wells is we're able to do repeatable aquifer tests. And now we get hydraulic characteristics of the aquifers and the aquatards. And that makes a big difference when we're trying to do modeling, especially at a site-specific review level. An expansion of that data set is an effective tool for communication. It's very difficult to argue with a graph of water level data. It's rising, it's falling, it's seasonal. You can see what the seasonal patterns are. There's just a lot of good objective data that forms the basis, or can form the basis, of a good and a healthy discussion. So, clearly I'm in favor of the monitoring wells because we're still doing it after 13 years of doing this. But there's also a precedent for doing that in other states as well. So for what it's worth, that's kind of my 2 cents on those. It provides some unique things. There's a time window to get it done in. The zone Cs and Ds are growing, or at the very least shifting. And there's a lot of cold transitionals that we've got to worry about as well. You got an opportunity to build some trust with growers, which is pretty badly needed, and it's going to be sorely needed when we get to water use groups. We have to have conversations about who gets to use what water. And a really big one, I think, that is easily missed is the ability to do those aquifer tests because they're near high capacity wells. There's 5,800, I believe, irrigation wells across the state. Each one of those represents a place where we could do a very affordable aquifer test because they already have the high capacity well, the power, the distribution system to prevent leakage. Everything's there, and it's repeatable. It's not just a one-shot time. If we don't like the results, we can go back or we can add more wells. So it's a pretty unique opportunity, in my opinion, and it definitely falls in line with what I've heard in a number of different committees. Just serving as one of those technical guys and listening to others' comments. So that was a mouthful. So hopefully not too much.
Good. Thank you, Todd. Next up, Jason Walter.
Hey, Brian, thanks.
I think Todd made the point. I just wanted, some of the exchange a few minutes ago seemed like it would be worth mentioning that we started over a decade ago, the ag community measuring and doing what we did, and really we feel like that's been a great investment that we've made, and we are smarter and understand more than we did 13 years ago what we have for water. And the overall the ag community would like to see that expanded. And that's in essence what I think we see happening here is just an expansion of what was started back then. And just another comment, we farm in different areas across the country, and boy, it's a no-brainer to me. I mean, anytime that we're in a state where we have access to very good, relevant data, it seems like we're making smart and scientific decisions. The regulators and the folks at the state capitals are equipped to do the right things for their constituents, and right now it feels like that's a big opportunity here in Michigan. So that's just my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason. Buddy, I see you just popped your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, Kelly's correct on some things. We have a unique opportunity here in a short window of time. I'm not sure who's spearheading this particular project, but anytime we can sign on to more data and more information, and whether the fingers point towards Eagle and those first two comments are correct or incorrect, I think we can all agree, and we all have agreed in committee meetings and in council meetings that more data is crucial. And I'll be the first one to tell you that the well logic data is grossly inaccurate. And anytime we can get hydrogeologic people or hydrogeologists and the professors together to agree and put things in paper that is great data, it's only going to help us in the future. So that's all I've got to say about that.
Thank you, buddy. I see Ralph Hefner. Go ahead, Ralph.
Yeah, thanks. Again, I'm Ralph Hefner from the U.S. Geological Survey. And I guess I'm a little taken back by this proposal here, because I proposed something very similar to the Water Use Advisory Council several years ago. And at that time, again, as we had mentioned several times, that the financial situation was quite different. And my understanding was that actually part of the USGS proposal, and it's certainly not 500 wells, but it was 2 wells per county, and it was not specifically geared towards ag areas or water use areas. It was just evaluating the water resources of the state. We had proposed a much smaller budget, but a long-term commitment towards collecting these data. And this is the first I'm hearing of this network, and it's again, I'm just taken back. I don't know if it's the right forum to kind of get on my soapbox here, but again, I don't know that. At least we could have had some discussions on this whole thing. That's it.
Yeah, thank you, Ralph. I'll make my own kind of personal comments here too. I think a lot of this is about opportunity and how deliberately we like to plot through committees to reach consensus, to convince ourselves of sample designs, techniques, protocols, spatial distribution, different data types. We like to be that level of thorough and meticulous. I like it because when I get to participate in it and I go talk with legislators and ask them to make an investment, I know I can stand behind it mentally and answer their questions, that it is a great proposal. One lesson that some of the federal dollar opportunities are presenting that I've learned is, if I could go back when we were getting ready to start outlining our report, we should have done our megalist report too. We should have created a 10-year vision of everything that we believe needs to be done to the program, and then a section of the report that was the tightly prioritized, frugal and fiscally conservative at the time. We didn't do that megalist, the grand visioning, and I think at some point we need to. I think in this case, the unforeseen opportunities that some of this large-scale federal funding offers creates an opportunity, but it's uncomfortable. You know, at least for me, it's uncomfortable in the sense that, you know, I can definitely agree too. Would I love to see way more groundwater monitoring network? Yeah, I think what we proposed in our report was, you know, pretty modest, really modest. I know we wanted more than that, but I struggle with knowing how much can we get and what is additive and what starts taking out of the other buckets. So what I don't know is, you know, do we need 500? Where should the 500 be located? And if that's $25 million, if that went on top of the investments being talked about in the other buckets, that's great. But if that investment starts creeping down the other buckets, is that something that I understand or would agree with? And those are hard. So I don't have the answers. I'm not going to say it even if I did. I'm just saying that I recognize that you know, we're dealing with unforeseen opportunities. I appreciate that there are groups that are trying to respond and put ideas out that may be latched on. I appreciate that. And I think that, you know, depending on where this goes, and if there's a desire for it, or if there's a need in the future, I think we can definitely dig into this. I even think, you know, one of our report recommendations was literally, I think it was a modest, you know, $50,000 to get some technical assistance, but it was to basically do a gap analysis and inventory of what data we have so that we could precisely say every type of data and where do we need it and optimize that so we could return with that very, you know, here's exactly what we would choose. And this opportunity is sort of shortcutting an awful lot of that. So for me, those are some of my thoughts. I see Doug has his hand, and then we have Dave online. Yeah, Doug, go ahead.
So on that point, just to clarify on the implementation strategy, I mean, we had 80 different items from the 2014 report that had no direction. And so the goal was to have the models, the data, and other committees truly look at what is needed today and what should we do to plan looking forward. And Brian, to your point, there was that long-term vision. We just didn't have that ready to make this big list. You're right, nobody really plans on a bunch of money. What is the appropriate use of the money? I certainly don't want to just have a whole bucket of money sitting there and not spend it appropriately. So I do really hope that as we venture, and if we get more than we ask for, we spend it how we do deem it appropriate. But one thing that we've talked about time and time again is data. We got to be able to have updated data. So when this came around, you're right, it is a very quick hit. We have to get something moving quickly and not wait until the end of our 2022 report. And so that's why we jumped on to this group, just to have that clarification. Yes, the council sets the direction of how the money's going to be spent, but we also didn't want to lose that opportunity. But I believe as a council, we did what we should have done. So I don't want to say that we didn't do the long term. I don't want to say that we didn't look what is our big grand picture, because we weren't quite there yet. And I think we will. And this is certainly launching.
Thank you. All right, I see Dave Lush and then Todd Feenstra, and this is great, but at some point I will keep letting it go as long as possible, but I know we have a couple more long presentations, so we'll probably try to wrap up in a couple. Dave Lush, go ahead.
Yeah, Brian, just to move this topic forward, and I do support more data collection, can we simply have this proposal brought up in a January meeting of the data committee?
If everybody wants it to be, sure. If there's advantage to it and desire for it, absolutely. Okay. Todd Feenstra.
Just one last comment from me on this. You know, I was able to look at some of the boilerplate language that was attached to the request, and I know that one of the advantages of the USGS network that's nationwide is it standardizes a lot of stuff. There's actually a training program that you have to attend in order to contribute to the network, and there's some specific field sheets and specific methodologies, procedures such and it's all the same nationwide. I know that because we're doing 4 of them in Indiana in the voluntary network right now. So in my view, I don't see this as short-circuiting anything. I see this as an unusual opportunity to create a network that catches Michigan up with a lot of the other states that are really digging in and having trouble with water availability and studies, even stream depletion or declining aquifers for that matter. But the standardization part of it should give a blanket of security in that it's being done the same way as being done across the country by other professionals. And so it felt to me like it's pretty well thought out, that there's definitely some clear advantages here, but I also understand it's a little uncomfortable because of the speed that it could move at. Cost-wise, I know from working in Indiana with this network and with the Indiana DNR as well, as they've been installing wells. I know they're following this pattern, but I know that the expenses on this, when you break it down by a per well cost too, are definitely realistic. And so it's a good value for the dollar. So, and that's just from a business perspective. But overall, I think just the ability to say, hey, it's standardized, and it's not that complex. The hardest part is finding the sites and getting permissions. So there should be some comfort in that, in the multiple uses of the data. At some point, we're going to have to verify the models with long-term data. And I just don't see, I've been working with the MIWAT now for 13 years, just like the rest of you. I just don't see that happening on a large scale yet. That would give me a lot more comfort in any of the modeling process if we saw some of that verification happening.
I see Dave Hamilton has an additional comment here in the room.
Yeah, I just want to say that, again, I'm glad to see the support for data collection. I'm glad to see that we're taking advantage of this opportunity, we being whoever's doing this. My main comment is from here, I think we just need to coordinate, make sure that, certain quality of data is collected following certain standards. I think there should be discussion about where these wells should go. But no, I'm appreciative of the strong support for data collection, because I agree with it, and it's hard to get that. So I just wanted to express that.
Thank you. All right, I gotta pull the plug on this. I just looked and we scheduled this until 3, not 4.
Yeah, I saw that.
So, Dave, you're gonna have to prepare real quickly. We're gonna go ahead to agenda item 8, committee chair reports. I'm gonna start with a very quick and disappointing one from the data committee. We have not had a meeting since our last water council meeting. We have a couple of work items that are out there, data collection procedures, standardization discussions that we started that need work in order to progress, and probably similar with some of the late pay ride discussions that we've initiated. At this point, no real progress to mention, but for committee members, just anticipate that probably within the next couple of days, you'll receive a series of meeting schedulers. We're going to try to get some January, February, and March dates scheduled in advance. So that's it for data collection. Anticipating no questions on data collection, we'll move immediately to implementation committee update.
I think I got some slides. All right, so we did meet since our last committee meeting on October 21st. Really kind of focused around where do we at with the funding on this. So there's not really kind of, we're up in the arms of how do we implement some of the recommendations until we know actually we have. We did talk about, hey, we got a report due in a year from now. So we really got to start working on that, focusing on all of the other subcommittees to have those discussions so that we can start generating that report sooner than later. Next slide. And, one of the things, this is just on, I guess, the to-do list, that once we have a quorum, there are some items that we want to be dropped from the 2014 report I don't know quite how to, what officially needs to take place, but they were listed in the 2014 report. And if we click to the next, it's just there was a request to have the WAT registration number be a required field and well logic, and that is not supported by Eagle at this point, nor the industry. So we've got the reasoning behind it that Eagle's currently able to run well logic to identify pumps with capacity over 70 gallons per minute, so there's no need to make this be a required field. Also, drinking water unit does not support the recommendation change, as it's impossible to implement. So it was a formal item in the 2014 that is being requested that we do not act upon. So I don't know whether the full council has to adopt the dropping of that, or we just let it go. But it seems like it would be a loose end if someone ever looks back saying, hey, this recommendation was made, why didn't you follow up on it? And then the next one we have is just the process for checking the compliance of as-built well construction details with the WAT and SSR registration. Recommendation is not supported by Eagle Drinking Water and Environmental Health Division, nor the Michigan Groundwater Association. There was training associated with it, and really the kind of Eagle at that point is working with stakeholders to address this. So this is an item too that we believe should be not moved forward. But I guess this will kind of wait until we have a full quorum.
So I guess what I suggest, I think this kind of reporting is important. I don't think we need to formally do anything.
Okay.
The recommendation wasn't done, but I think we report back to, we recommended this a number of years ago, this is where it's at, and we decided not to proceed. Now, if the council said, hey, wait a minute, we think this is really important, well, then that'd be another matter, and say we need to look at more, do something different. But I think as long as we're saying this is it, and there's no objection.
Okay, so if those could be done in the minutes then, so we'd have a history of that.
So, okay, I guess that was my question, is capturing it in the minutes going to be enough? Or do you want it in the 22 report that you reviewed those recommendations and are formally withdrawing them? Because the chances the legislature seeing the minutes are very small.
That's probably a better way to do that.
Yeah, we can continue to kind of kick it around, make sure we get it right. But what I think I would recommend is that, again, when we have that right meeting, that the implementation committee formally make that, when everybody's present, say we would like a vote of consensus here on that item. And then for our next report under, however we structure it, to make a note that, just for clarity, previous recommendations 2.2, 3.1, have been purposely or explicitly found to no longer be preferred or advisable, something like that. So it does make it into a report.
Okay. And I think our 2014 recommendation is actually to the department. I don't think we sent that to the legislature.
Correct. Yeah.
So I think there is a difference there. Yeah. I think there's a difference if we formally send something to the legislature and we're
I think you're probably right formally, but all of those reports are online, and when people kind of come to it and look, they do see that type of stuff. So I see some value in the next report, making sure that it's kind of an action item that everybody, we got everybody's consensus.
All right, so we'll make it a formal motion from the implementation committee at a meeting with full quorum. And then, so we'll have that documentation, and we will also include it in the report, so we're.
Yes, perfect. Good, and that is my report.
Thank you. Thank you. John Yelich, I see you have a hand up quickly.
I did very quickly, and Jim Milne can speak up to this too, is that we as the Michigan Geologic Survey provide training to the drillers at their at the Michigan Groundwater Association annual meeting. And that particular meeting, we have a session that's set up with Jim Milne, with the Water Division, as well as Drinking Water, Sarah Pearson, to specifically talk about the emphasis of making sure that the accuracy is there. And so we have a separate training session that we're going to be doing at the Michigan Groundwater Association. So I don't know, Jim, if you want to add anything else to that, but we put that into the planning network for the Michigan Groundwater Association.
Right. That just, yeah, in addition to that is the ongoing trainings that MGS has with Michigan Groundwater Association for the drillers, so at the conference and then the ongoing training.
Thank you for those notes. Dave Hamilton, Models Committee update and presentation for us.
Okay, what I'd like to do is, I'll go to the next slide, Jim, is that we had a lot of discussion in the Models Committee. We had a work group working on half max rule and the stream flow depletion apportionment issue. And just as a reminder, this has been a long-standing topic of discussion. So that in 2014, we actually had a proposal to change the half max rule, which did not, was not approved by the council. And so we've done additional work because it is an important issue. So what I want to do is kind of revisit what the half max rule is, talk about what an option might be for looking at stream flow depletion apportionment in a different way, and just have some general discussion. We do not have a recommendation at this time, so I wanted to take that. We're not asking for action from the council, but this is more of an education, let you know what's going on, give you a chance for some feedback, questions that you think you would like us to answer before we bring it back more formally to the council. So next slide. So first, how the half max rule works. So in the center of that picture, there's a little faucet kind of thing. So that's a high capacity well. The way that the tool works now is that it looks for every adjacent water management area, and it finds the closest stream in that water management area. So on this one, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 adjacent water management areas where it goes and it picks out the closest point to that. It also picks up what's the closest stream within the home water management area. So what it does is it then sees where they are, and it does some calculations using the Hunt solution to figure out what the depletion would be from each of these. Next slide. So this is an example of one where the one that we just looked at. So in the home watershed, the depletion was about 83 gallons per minute. In one of the neighbors, a close one, it was about 53 gallons per minute. There were other ones that extended out from 20 down to 3 gallons per minute. Now what the half max rule was that if a depletion was less than 1/2 of the maximum depletion, then it would be discarded. And so you see the maximum is 82, so half of that's 41. So anything below 41 gallons per minute is discarded. And I'll show you a calculation that we had done earlier as a proposal to treat this differently, but right now this is exactly what the tool does. So all those other depletions are discarded, ignored, they're not part of the system. The top two are included in the accounting system, and that is what is debited on the accounts of the water management area. Now I want to stop there, see if there's any questions, because this is important to make sure people understand, because this is how the system works. Are there any questions on that?
Clarification again. Okay. The main reason of doing that was to try to prevent what appear to be erroneous apportionments, right?
Yeah,
not because it necessarily reflects how you wanted to account. It was a solution to prevent a problem.
Exactly. So if you go back one slide. So the reason is, if you see some of these lines, they cross other streams. Some of these are getting not only crossing other streams, but they're getting awfully far away. And so some of these are really nonsensical solutions. They don't make sense. The drawdown cone would not reach those points. So we're calculating a theoretical depletion on something that wouldn't happen hydrologically. So the purpose of the half max rule was to eliminate those. So it was a simple means of trying to address that question. So thank you very much. All right, next, 2 slides ahead now. Okay, so the work that we did in creating the tool was actually groundbreaking. There was no other work that was like that that we can find anywhere. And so we were developing new science. We were applying it in a way that hadn't been applied before. And And we did it in a very fast time period. And so that the way that the current system works, I think was actually, I would view it as actually a mistake that it discarded those depletions. It should have picked them back up in some manner, but not to all of those areas that it was. This particular paper is an excellent paper, and it was written by a guy, Zipper, who was basically coming at the same question. Okay, if we have a well, how do we find out how much water is going to be depleted from nearby rivers? So he had the exact same question that we did. And he looked around, has anybody else done this? And the only thing he found was the work that we did. And he said, hey, this is good stuff, but I think I can do better. And that's what he did, is he developed something that it's built off from what we did. He's taken the science further, he's developed an application that's more sophisticated than what we were able to do at the time that we developed the tool. And so I'm going to explain that to you today. And then in 1984, we looked at 30 different examples across the state at wells, and we're going to look at those same wells with this new methodology. Okay, next slide. So the way that he works this is that first of all, you need a mechanism to identify which streams are we talking about. And there were several ones that he looked at and proposed. So that's that row of illustrations at the top there under step 1. The second one is you need to be able to calculate what is the depletion from the streams that you've identified as being important. And there's a number of different methodologies that can be used to identify which ones should be depleted. And then the third step is to actually calculate the depletion. So if we go to the next slide, what we see here is that in identifying what streams should be included, he looked at a number of things, and he did some numerical modeling to try to figure out, as a sort of step back, this is using analytical solutions just like what we did in the tool. The tool is based on the Hunt analytical solution. He ends up using the same thing, but a different way of identifying what streams are going to be depleted and how much is going to be depleted from each one. So that's where the difference comes in. And so he looked at it and he said, okay, what he found is that the figure that's to the right, that shows the depletion lines are being drawn to a number of different points along each of the stream reaches. A number. This is picking up stream geometry because it varies the distances from the well, and you're looking at all of these at once. So it's adding a much higher degree of sophistication to the analysis. He recommended using what he called web squared, so that he would use this kind of analysis to look at the streams. He would use a Bayesian polygon method to identify which streams should be depleted. He would use this web squared, which is an inverse distance squared method. So it means that the further you are from the well, the lower the amount of depletion is going to be. And it's an inverse square, so the amount drops off rapidly as you move away from the well. And so he, and then he also came up with where he would say, let's identify which streams are adjacent, which is the bottom figure here, where he uses a Bayesian polygon to identify which streams are adjacent. He also then did a way where he expanded from that adjacent. He called that adjacent and expanding. So based on his numerical modeling, he found that web squared with adjacent and expanding fit best for the work that he did of comparing it with numerical models. Next slide. So we looked at this in Michigan again. So we looked at a few where we looked at the adjacent and expanding. I want to give some credit to some of my coworkers on this because Steve Kohler did an awful lot of work on this. He's familiar with modeling in R, and so the source code of this was in R. And so he actually took the source code that was from that paper that we referenced, and he ran the model for the 30 places in Michigan. And then I took that and I tried to put it into a package that we could then look at and evaluate it as a council. So, and of course, Howard is involved in this. He doesn't have much time these days, but we'd have his expertise when we could to keep him involved in what we were doing with this. So we looked first at the adjacent expanding because that's what was recommended. What we found is that all of the streams in white, including some of the water management areas that are gray, which means I'm not sure what it means here, but anyway, all the streams are in white were identified as that they should have a depletion. But as we looked at this, it's like on this particular example, which was in Kalamazoo County, there were 130 stream segments that were identified. Of those, only the first 7 or 8 had anything that was a significant depletion. Beyond that, it got not only below 1 gallon, but well below 1 gallon per minute, got into the thousands to the 10,000th of a gallon per minute. It was like, this thing is reproducing what we're trying to get away from with half max rule. It's picking up streams that are far away, that are crossing other streams, and it's like, we didn't really want to go there. So next slide. So well, what if we just start with the adjacent? And that's what we did, and the results look actually very good. And model committee, we went through a number of those. We're going to go through a couple of them here, just to give you a feel for what it is. But if anybody wants to dig into more detail, I can give you all the information you want so you can look at what was done, and you can play with it to your heart's content. But again, looking at this, the streams in white were identified as being adjacent using the Thies polygon method. So those are the ones we're going to deplete. So next slide. So the way this works is that out of the code that Steve ran, he had the NHD plus stream segments, which is a very small stream segment. And he could identify every stream segment. In fact, that's how we did the analysis. We're looking at what stream segments are here, which should be included. So it's not even the reaches that we're using in the tool, but it's a smaller portion of streams. And each one has a number. So what I could do is take what Steve had identified by color, this stream segment, and then apply that depletion into the water management area, which is what we use in our whole accounting system. So next slide. So with the color code, you've got to look at it pretty closely because there can be changes. Some of these segments are pretty small. So that's what I'd have to do in making sure I was picking up all the stream segments. Next slide. And then taking the output from the work that Steve did, the FIW squared, that's the apportionment based on the web squared to each of the stream segments. The ID is inverse distance. And then further down, there's another one where I have a total that's 145, 125. That's what the total depletion would be based on the web squared and off the inverse distance. The inverse distance, the only reason I carried that is that's the most similar to what we use in the tool. So I carry that along just for comparison purposes. So then, for example here, everything that's in yellow was all in the home watershed, this 2988. So those are summed together from the stream segments to that water management area. The other stream segments are all in 2143, and so those are summed together. So we see here under the web squared, for the water management area that's at home, we'd get 138 gallons per minute. For the adjacent one, we'd get 6.7 gallons per minute. Next slide. So this is bringing us back again to which streams are affected. Those are the ones that are affected. They're in color. Next slide. What we care about from our process, though, is what's the depletion out of the water management area. That's how the whole system is set up. We're looking at water management areas and what is the depletion. So this table is from the work that we did back in 2014. So the first few columns show what the tool calculates now. And so we have a certain well, we're calling it Kalamazoo 2. It's got its well ID number. It's home watershed 2988, and the tool calculated 101 gallons per minute depletion from that home watershed. Based on the half max rule, none of the neighboring ones, when you look at this, there's like about a dozen or more of neighboring watersheds, water management areas in this. None of them were even close to being half of that. They're all very small numbers. So the current process threw all of those away. But the other hand is it threw away 20% of the total depletion that the method had calculated. So when we looked at this in 2016, we said, well, maybe what we should do is let's use the half max rule to identify which streams we should deplete, but then recalculate the depletion based on those streams. So in this case, it would be recalculated based on just the home watershed. So in the existing system, we find the closest point, single point to that, and then we recalculate what the depletion would be. And that would be at 215 gallons per minute. Now, with the web squared, which I think is the strongest of what was proposed and was recommended by the author of the study that we're working from, it would give us 138 gallons per minute from the home watershed, and then 6.7 out of one of the neighboring sub-watersheds, or excuse me, one of the neighboring water management areas, for a total depletion of 145 gallons per minute. I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions at this point.
Anybody online with questions?
So what we did then, this table is kind of the important thing. So the next couple examples I'll use, I'm going to just jump to that table, but just every time we have to go when we looked at what is the segment number, what water management area is it in, and we aggregate it to the water management area. Okay, next slide. So this is the next one. This is in Kalamazoo County, Kalamazoo 2. And this one is kind of interesting. So the well is the red dot. And in this case, contrary to how we usually do things, the streams are in black and the water management boundaries are in blue. So that can be confusing, so I want to point that out. But it's a lot easier to find the colors when you're going from a black stream to colors in the stream segments. So it's easier for us to work with to identify stream segments and make sure we're picking them up. One of the things that you notice with this well is about halfway between two streams, but there's a huge difference as to how it's going to draw from the streams. You notice that the stream that's in 21091, it forms almost an arc around the well. The other stream is basically running away. There's a point that's close to it, but the rest of the stream is further away. Now, the way that the tool works now is that it goes to the closest point on either stream and makes the calculation of the depletion. What this web square does is it looks at a number of points spread across all of those colored stream segments and calculates the depletion based on all of those. So we'll go to the next slide. So we can see that what we had in the original system, there were the two water streams that were close to the well. They each were depleted. The home one was picking up 46 gallons per minute. The further one was 24 gallons per minute. 24 is more than half of the max, so that was included. So the system accounts for 70 gallons per minute. There were a couple other water management areas that were neighbors, but they were not counted. It was something less than 20% of the total depletion. But again, the tool and the way the current system works, 70 gallons per minute is what was used. Using the half max rule, if we went back and only looked at those two water management areas and one point on each of those streams, we would come up with these different numbers for 97 gallons per minute as the depletion. And again, we're not proposing that. That's what we looked at in 2014. We have a much better thing that we're looking at now. So the web squared, it actually flips how much water is coming out of each stream because it's looking at multiple points along the stream. So the one, as you recall, it formed an arc. So it has a lot of points that are actually relatively close to the well. The other well that goes to the south, there was only one point that was close to the well. And you see this reflected in that the stream that forms the arc, 54 gallons per minute would be depleted, 25 gallons per minute from the home, for a total of about 80 gallons per minute. Next slide. Here's another one. In this particular one, you see that there's a stream segment that is not actually even in an adjacent water management area. So before we only looked at adjacent water management areas, you can have streams that are actually close, but because they're not in an adjacent one, the permit system doesn't look at them. With this, we're looking at all adjacent streams, regardless of if they're in a different water management area or not, or if they're crossing some. So let's see. In looking at how this is depleting, it's doing a good job of not crossing streams. It's looked like pretty reasonable way that it's picking up where it's depleting from. Next slide. And so this one is cast 2. So in the tool, it accounted for 17 gallons per minute for all of these neighbors. We've got about 8 or 10 neighbors here, and it was almost 43% of the total depletion, but that was ignored because of the way that we set up the system. As we did this, it focused in most specifically on one of the nearby watersheds, but it picked up a couple others, relatively small numbers, including one that wasn't an actual neighbor, but it picked it up, small depletion. Here we have the total depletion of 34 gallons per minute versus 30 based on the total calculated under the old system, but only 17 was actually depleted from the accounting system. All right, next slide. And this is one where we're way up in a headwater area. And again, it does a good job of identifying stream segments that are nearby. And it does a pretty good job of picking them up. So the next slide shows what the depletions would look like. So under the current system, it was 82 out of the home water management area, 53 out of a neighbor, and then that's all that would be depleted, 135 gallons per minute. If we included the other ones, it would go up to 182. If we recalculated using just half max rule, recalculated and go all the way up to 218, which again, we're not doing that. But with this web squared methodology, we picked up 5 of these watersheds, 2 of them which were not neighbors, but they were actually physically closer, and they picked up depletions for a total of 92 gallons per minute, compared to what the current tool does, 135. What if we looked at the total depletion would have been 181. So the number can go down. Usually it's not, but it can, depending on what the methodology or the situation, how close the streams are. Next slide. So this slide and the next one is we went through all 30 of the water management areas that we had looked at before, went through the calculations. I think you'll get this in your notes from this meeting, so you can look at those. And the next slide just completes the list. So as we go through there, the columns in yellow, that's the depletion. The current tool has the depletion, the number of watersheds depleted. Kind of the orangish color is what it would be if we included all of the water management areas that the tool looks at now, including those that are less than half max. The web squared is this method that I'm talking about here. It shows what the depletion would be and how many water management areas would be depleted. So that's the end of the slides. So we're going to continue to work on this as a committee. We had a number of questions that came up and presented it to the committee. But I'd like to hear from the entire council. Are there any questions, concerns that you have that we should address as we're looking at this? Just anything that you'd like us to look at. Or if you have any questions on what I presented. These are just a couple examples. We've got all 30, so you can look at that table. And if you have particular questions, I'm glad to send you whatever information you want.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. I already see Doug has a question or comment.
So Dave, very thorough, and I was on that committee until I had to drop off. So as I say, it was nice to kind of hear this again. What I guess where I'm at is, it looks like the majority of it, we are underrepresenting how much of the watershed is actually being depleted. So, I mean, that kind of raises concerns because right now is it real life representative of what we have out there?
Let's go back a few slides, pick up one of this map. So I'll stop right there. So I'll make sure I understand your question. So what we did in the tool, what we do in the tool is that we draw a line from that red dot to every water management area that is adjacent to the home water management area.
Right.
So there would be one line that would go through in 22036, there would be one straight line that go there. To the one that's straight north, which actually there would be one that goes straight north because that one's not directly connected. So this 22288 wouldn't even be included. The next one, there'd be one line that goes to, what's it, 2190. And it's going to draw lines to all of the adjacent.
Right. Well, the next slide though, where we start showing the tables, this is where I'm at. So here, now this one's not the right example because it actually went down, but your total accounted for of 135 compared to 92 and 88.
Right.
The other ones, the most of them were all reversed, that it was 135 and then 180.
Yeah, let's go back to another one.
So that's where, and then this summary table here kind of shows that, well, this one shows that we're over on the lion's share of them.
Yeah, let's go back to one of the other tables because here's an example. So, and this is probably a pretty good example because the way that the half max rule worked is that we cut everything off that was less than half of the 17.1. So all of these other ones completely gone. So what we're using in the tool right now is 17.1.
And you're saying it should be 30 or 29.7.
Well, 34 is what this web squared method would come up.
Okay.
And we can talk about and argue about how accurate is this? Is this a better representation? And one of the things that we want to do is compare this with a model someplace where we got more detailed information where we can make a more direct comparison. We'd like to do that. But so that the comparison here of methodologies would be that 34 would compare to 30 if you're looking at the total methodology. But the way that we wrote the rules is that because we were picking up all of these neighbors that went across streams and everything else, there were nonsensical solutions.
Right.
And what we proposed back in 2014 was, well, what if we just recalculate it based on the ones that we're including? And that number would have been, in this case, 31 gallons per minute. Some of them was much higher numbers. This is I think, a more accurate way. We go back and look at how it's looked at a number of points along streams. It's a much better way of calculating what the depletion would be based on the neighboring streams that are actually neighboring and subject to drawdown. Does that answer your question?
It does. It's just concerning if all of a sudden this got implemented. It seems like those that have had an approved withdrawal could all of a sudden be put in an area where you'd say, hey, hold on, based on this new methodology, you no longer are allowed to operate.
Well, that's one of the things that we want to look at very carefully is that first of all, we want to make sure it's a really good method. But then number two, we have to look at, if we're going to implement it, what does it mean and how would we do it? I think the council would have to weigh in as to how to do that. Because I don't think it's in anybody's interest all of a sudden.
Yes.
We've got to shut down a bunch of irrigation wells.
Yep. Okay.
I'm not seeing any other questions being solicited of you online.
Okay.
I would say that I appreciate this a lot. Getting to participate in the models group, I think that we have more time with it, but I think it makes a lot of sense. To me, it feels intermediate and more based in reality than either the way that we do it or the total calculations, the way that we do it. Either pick up a ton of streams or you pick up a ton of streets and then cut most of them out and pretend that the reduction to some streets don't happen because we chose 50% versus choosing a 20% max rule. This seems, very logical in that it's based on more spatial information. But I agree, we need to be careful with it, and, like the downstream accounting issue, there's, we want to continue to refine things, make everything more realistic, but when doing so creates, moving forward creates some problems in the past. We're going to have to, sooner or later, figure out how we navigate that.
And the developer of this, what he did is he did a lot of models, or worked with a lot of models to verify, does this make sense? You may recall one of the first slides, there are a lot of different ways that he was looking at. He picked out, this is the best that best picks up this place I've looked at. Now he was looking at places in Kansas and British Columbia, and I'm not sure where else he might have done some work. We want to look at these 30 examples here in Michigan. We would like to pick up a model here in Michigan and do some more comparison. And that was pretty much what the modeling committee said, is that that's what we'd like to do. So we'll look for the ability to do that.
Thank you. I'm going to hold on any additional comments. I do see John's hand up, but we are now officially past our scheduled end date for this meeting, and that's important. However, we're not sitting here with a voting quorum, business and votes and consensus to conduct. I want to be respectful though, and as people and participants do need to go because they've scheduled other things, I would warmly welcome you to gracefully bow out if they need be. Cover the rest of the agenda items, but again, if any of you do need to go, please feel free to bow out without any guilt or shame attached to that. So having said that, I would like to go ahead and move on to the new topics committee. Pat, do you have a brief update?
Yeah, I'll be brief. We have we didn't meet since the last meeting, but we do have a meeting, and it's looks like it's going to be scheduled for January 5th from 1 to 2. I'll send out a meeting notice here this week. But there's two topics that we're going to discuss. One is a follow-up from the users committee discussion we had over a year ago. Emily had been working with Eagle staff on developing this document. It's entitled Draft Overview of Michigan's Water Use Program and Frequently Asked Questions about Water Withdrawals and Water User Committees. So I'm really interested to dive into this with the committee and give them some feedback, and hopefully this document can be used as a resource to talk to the public about some of these challenging topics. And then we're also going to talk for, I think, the third time at a committee level with Jeremiah Asher regarding his topic. So we hope to get to consensus on that before we bring it in front of the Water Use Advisory Council, which I thought was the process we were following. So we're going to continue to go forward with that, and hopefully we can get that in front of you before too long. So if anybody wants to be invited to that meeting, please drop me an email, tentatively January 5th from 1 to 2 o'clock. And then after we get that review of that document, we will be presenting that to the council, and you'll get another stab at providing input to that document as well. That's all I had.
And if anybody has
I can't hear you.
Questions or desire to be involved in any of what Pat mentioned, to just get a hold of him by email. Okay, moving on. We have the Conservation and Efficiency Committee. Is that Kelly or Emily?
I'll go ahead and give it a stab, and then Emily will take part of it because she's got way more information on some of it than I do. So if you want to move to the first slide, So we have continued the speaker series that we kind of started throughout the year. Most recently, we had Yvonne Lewis from Consumers Energy, and she gave us some insight into the residential programs that they do for water conservation. James Clift came in and gave us a really good overview of the My Healthy Climate Plan that's coming together at the state level. And just recently, we discussed Jeremiah Asher's new topics committee presentation that he had about groundwater offset programs. And then in January, we have Matt Yates, who is part of the Resource Conservation Partners out of South Carolina and Florida, talking about kind of a mobile lab or unit that they have for irrigation. The Dow Fellows project is wrapping up. Their final report is due in December. There were some struggles with the content, and I can definitely understand that, kind of stepping into this world, right? So none of them kind of came with that kind of background. And so just understanding the terminology and some of that stuff kind of put them at a disadvantage. But the committee is going to review their final report and kind of talk about next steps. We're probably not going to get all of the things that we wanted out of this project, so we're still probably going to need to have to move forward, take what this group was able to put together, and then continue to work on that to be able to come up with a robust look at water use programs in other states and at the national level and how we would use that in Michigan. Emily, did I capture that, or do you want to add to that?
No, that was great.
Next slide. We also took a look at the ag efficiency recommendation from 2020, and we really we formed a subgroup of our committee because we were like, if there is going to be funding for this, we really want to help everyone understand what was in basically less than 2 paragraphs of information. So the group got together and really put together a document that helps explain like what's happening now for irrigation education in the state, and then providing kind of a needs assessment or where that gap is that the recommendation would cover. Like, where is the education now? Where does it need to be? Or what could we do in addition to what we are currently doing? And how do we cover that gap? MSU was also able to come up with a sample position description for that. So it really helps us understand where the education would be and how it would be conducted. Next slide. So as we look forward into 2020, Emily and I are meeting in January after our next committee meeting to really focus in on putting together a plan for how is the committee going to review our last year's work plan and develop a work plan for 2022, knowing that it's going to have to dovetail into what the full council is planning to do as far as recommendations. So we're still planning to meet monthly on the first Thursdays from 9 until 10:30. And we do have, like I said, some of those speakers that we're going to continue to bring in so that we can make sure that we've got robust discussion and deep knowledge in the areas that we're trying to put recommendations together on. Next slide. All right, this is where Emily comes in. So I'll hand it over to Emily.
Thanks, Kelly. So I wanted to make the council aware that this next spring, May 14th through the 20th, the Compact Council and the regional body will be hosting another session as part of the International Association for Great Lakes Research. This year will be focused on the theme from the 5-year science strategy, which is water conservation. So I have agreed to co-chair this session with Peter Johnson from the Conference of Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Governors and Premiers. So I wanted to make the council aware of this conference. It's actually going to be a consortium of a number of aquatic science conferences. So the name of the conference itself is called the Joint Aquatic Sciences Meeting. So it's a little confusing and nuanced. It will be hosted at the DeVos Convention Center in Grand Rapids. And as I mentioned, the theme is focused on water conservation for our session. It's focused on improving and implementing water conservation and water use efficiency across the Great Lakes Basin to protect water and water-dependent natural resources. So it's specifically looking for research projects to be presented at this session with some emphasis on engaging Indigenous organizations and encouraging traditional ecological knowledge. Go ahead and switch to the next slide, please. The overall conference theme is Rapid Changes, Collaborative Solutions, and the target audience is scientists, practitioners, policymakers, and others. The abstracts actually has been open since late November, but they didn't open the link in the portal to actually submit abstracts. So I wanted to make sure that you were aware of the deadline, January 10th, 2022. They did actually just open the portal as of yesterday. So you can submit abstracts now for that session. Pete and I will be working together as well as with Michigan's water use program to make sure that we select some abstracts that will make a nice robust session. But we want to encourage council members to be thinking about particular topics or projects that you think would be a good fit for this session. And I'm happy to talk with folks offline because I know we're running a little over today's meeting. Registration for the conference opens in spring of 2022. Speakers are required to pay a registration fee, and the fee ranges depending on the days that you're participating and whether or not you're a member of any of the organizations that are sponsoring. It is going to be a hybrid conference, so there is an option for recording presentations and attending virtually. And speakers who are attending in person will also have to record their presentations. So I'm happy that Pete is going to be handling all the logistics on that. I've included the website here in the link, and the link as well to the 5-year science strategy. So I don't know if we have time today to really have some discussion with the council. We were hoping to open it up for some discussion with all of you and get some ideas that you may have, but I'm happy to follow up offline and talk with any of you about topics. Given that this is in Michigan and all the focus that we've had with our Water Conservation Efficiency Committee over the last year, I'm really hoping that we can spotlight some of the projects that are going on in our state.
Excellent. Excellent. Emily, if there's anything that we can do, short of maybe creating a bunch of time today since we're already over, to help us that idea solicitation, let us know if we can do stuff over email. Send out letters, link people to you, let us know.
That sounds great, Brian. What I will do, we just actually got their drafted session announcement for this specific session between Pete and I. So I will make sure that that gets sent out to all the council members and the Water Conservation Efficiency Committee members. And then I'll just ask council members to forward that on throughout your networks and reach out to me if there's interest in setting up, a separate meeting, maybe that first week of January. I don't know if we can squeeze something in before Christmas. Happy to get on the line and talk with folks about some ideas so we can make sure we have some good abstracts coming in and a number of presentations to choose from.
I think, Jim, could we put a note when we send out the minutes later this week that a note to reach out to Kelly on this topic, or Emily? That'll go through the whole group.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you both. Appreciate it. Good stuff. Very good stuff. All right. I don't immediately see any hands raised, so we will move on to agenda item number 9. And for those of you that were looking at the slides, my co-chair had to leave to grab a child and get them to an activity, so I'm continuing on with the Eagle update.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for those of you who are sticking around. This is the program update for the water use program. Next slide, please. So I'm going to share program metrics from October through November. I'm going to give you a personnel update for Water Use Assessment Unit, give you an update on the status of depleted water management areas, then time permitting, I'll answer any questions. Next slide. So Austin, New York is going to start on January 10th, 2022. as SSR Geologist 9. So he just got his master's from Western Michigan. That's going to bring our number of SSR staff geologists back up to 4. Next slide. Okay, compliance communications include after the fact registrations, missing pump information requests, amended registrations, and installation verification requests. Violation notices include violations for unregistered wells, wells installed and or operated differently than authorized. Complaints include water level drops and new irrigation systems which may or may not be authorized. And if we receive multiple complaints for the same operation, it is only counted once. Jill Van Dyke also does pre-screening reviews for new or increased public water supply withdrawals for Eagle's drinking water division. The pre-screening reviews are essentially like Part 327 site-specific reviews. The one denial was for Pinckney, and Jill provided suggestions to drinking water about additional information or withdrawal modifications. Part 327 permits are required for newer increased withdrawals over 2 MGD. We've issued 1 permit so far with another permit application pending at the time of this update. There you go. So far, since July 9th of 2021, there have been 147 registrations through the tool and 97 registrations through SSRs. Yep. Of those 97 SSRs, 2 were denied, 97 were authorized, 2 were denied, 9 were retracted by the applicant, and another 11 were still pending when this data was queried. The average number of days to complete an SSR was 9 business days, and 73% of the SSRs were completed within the statutory 10 business day deadline. Slide. The top graph shows the cumulative trend in the average number of days to complete an SSR over time, and the bottom graph shows the cumulative trend in the percentage of SSRs that were completed within that statutory 10 business day deadline. Water management areas shown in red are currently in Zone D. We've got a new addition, Greg's Brook, which is Water Management Area 11745 in Allegheny County. Next slide. And this map shows the locations of those water management areas as of December 6th. And the legends have some explanation about next steps that are being taken by Eagle. So 1383 up in Misaki, we're collecting miscellaneous stream flow measurements and continuing to verify the index flow review is correct prior to contacting property owners about possibly reducing their schedules. Moving down to water management area 20950, which is Saginaw. Eagle's collecting stream flow measurements, again, looking at whether the index flow review is correct and completing a geology review to determine if any of the withdrawals are isolated from surface water. Moving over to 11745 in Allegheny County, that's pending 2 AutoPass registrations which have not been installed yet. They've got 18 months to do that before it expires. That water management area was split from another water management area, and we'll review that further once those withdrawals have been installed. Moving down to Californ, water management 3452. We're still waiting on a consultant developed model. We're expecting to get pretty soon. 19606, Osborne Drain, which is in Cass and Van Buren counties. We're working with the Attorney General and the property owner to determine how to resolve pending violations. Over in Hillsdale, Jackson, 10018, we're collecting stream flow measurements. And then 7235 over in Monroe, we're reviewing the registrations and the geology of that water management area.
Quick question, Jim. You had water management areas were split. What is that about?
Okay, any of the water use staff that are on want to jump in there with as I understand it, there was an issue about the water management area boundaries, and it was recommended that the streamline be updated.
So it's correction of a water management area boundary?
Right.
As opposed to creating another.
Yep.
The way that's worded, I thought you created a new one or something. It was really unclear.
So, yep, and that's, go ahead. So that's it. Are there any other questions? Looks like we got one in the chat.
Go ahead, Todd, Main Street, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, maybe Andy LeBaron could clarify. Andy, you gave a presentation at the Michiana Irrigation Association on Friday. And Andy, am I recalling correctly that in your presentation it showed 18 Zone Ds? I'm curious what the difference between that and today's numbers were.
Yeah, those Zone D watersheds, they can they can change at a moment's notice. To be honest with you, as soon as a site-specific review request comes in, that could trip a water management area into Zone D. It can happen at a moment's notice. So the data that I showed last Friday, I think there was actually 21 on that particular day, and I think I pulled that data, a week prior or so. So yeah, that's basically long and short of it. It just can happen at a moment's notice.
Thank you, Andy.
When I go through and make this map, I take out all of the SSR depletions. So any pending SSR depletion is not included in the map that you guys just saw. Those are water management areas that are in Zone Ds for other reasons.
So if I understand you correctly, Hannah, if a water management area is put into Zone D only because you've got pending SSR requests, that would not be shown in your map. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so I'll also try to clarify too, to see if I got it right. You can't actually be in Zone D unless you have the withdrawals occurring. And that, obviously happens for weird reasons because we don't permit that on purpose to happen. So an SSR is under review, but it would not be the right terminology to say that an SSR review triggers a Zone D. It might say, hey, we have an SSR that looks to be predicted to cause a Zone D, but you wouldn't grant it to happen. So you really can't be in Zone D because of SSR, is that right?
Yeah, we don't even have that comment. Never mind, we don't even have that comment on the table.
Yes.
We can't authorize it. We can't authorize it.
If it's Zone D, we wouldn't authorize it.
So you can have some weird situations and post hoc, determine or believe that you have one that occurred because of that. You can't through SSR. Okay. All right. Hey, thank you for a follow-up. Feel free to, easily continue it through some email. Again, I'll try to keep moving here. I appreciate everybody hanging in. I know it's getting late in the day. I'm going to try to make item number 10 as simple as possible in a moment. So if everybody can just get your calendars out for the next 6 months. So I won't do that scenario. The executive committee we will get back together, talk through the schedule, how long we can go alternating months, and when we may need to kick into monthly, knowing that we do have a report coming up in 12 months. We'll also have to do some conversations about when we are coming up on needing to take action and vote on a few things and really need to push for in-person forums. We will try to generally stick with some of the scheduling principles or recurrence frequencies that we've done and timing, but we'll do our best to kind of get back together, talk that through, propose some dates, and get them out there for vetting and get them on people's calendars. So that's probably the easiest way for us to do that. Is we'll sort through that for everybody and kind of get back to everybody with some suggestions. That brings us to open comments. Does anybody, council members or general public, have any comments about things that were discussed today? I see people straightening their desk a little bit. We do have John Yelich.
It was just the comment that we had after that discussion of the half max. What we talked about was comparing to real data someplace where we also had the mapping completed. That's what the comment was about.
Gotcha. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I saw your comment, and yes, that is also something that was discussed in the models committee, which is, using the opportunity for locations where we have enhanced data to see how this performs on map. I mean, obviously, even enhanced data is still it's a better view, but it's not the truth of how the world works. It's not a perfectly flawless. But I think that is the intent of the models committee to think that through and whether we can get that done. So yes, thank you, John. Does anybody else have any open comments about anything? Okay. Well, then I will, and I'll say that my comment is I appreciate everybody hanging in there. Appreciate that we're having good ramped up discussions. It's telling me that we are moving into that phase where we're going to schedule some more time and get to some more work. But other than that, I wanted to make sure that I wish you all very happy holidays, good times, safe times with your family, and things in January.
Well, Ryan, this is Frank Itawagisha. I missed if you gave a specific date for our next meeting.
I did not.
He waffled.
I'd like to keep my options open. We're working on it. It will be under development and communicated in the near future.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I again would accept the motion to adjourn, except that we can't formally vote.
We all motion. Bye. Have a happy holiday.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays.